Hi there, I'm Harari from the Music and Technology program here at Cal. And very briefly, music and technology has such a synergetic relationship that you wouldn't expect it. I'm a multi-instrumentalist first that continues to perform, but at the age of 13 I discovered EMK. By 14 I had my first synthesizer. After college graduation I discovered the world of music production, where I could marry my love for music and my love for technology, and found out that the technology could become a musical instrument. I could change the way performances were perceived by an audience by manipulating the waveforms and voltages and the amplitudes and the decibels and even the spaces, the acoustical spaces that people perceive the sound in. And that led me to my very current passion, which is psychoacoustics. Every single one of us lives through our day, and sound physiologically affects us every single moment of the day, and when we're asleep. So that's who I am. And before I proceed, I hope you will indulge me with keeping three thoughts in perspective before Dinesh leaves. The first thought was at the beginning of the day, where he showed that wonderful slide, which was there's complicated systems and then there's complexities. And keep that in mind. The second is what's old is new again. All right, Carmen, Miranda, Madonna, Lady Gaga, right? Shock factor. We went from fruit to steak. But it's still the same sort of perception on how can I get people to pay attention to me. The third is success in music and performance is always a matter of perception. It's how the audience receives what you're trying to do. So keep those thoughts in mind, and I'm going to just touch on very briefly, touch on three topics. Systems and complexity in music, systems and complexity in mythology, and then emergent behavior that we experience. All right, so really quickly, music, systems, music theory, right? As we progress through history, the music theory got more and more complex based off of the sociological impact that musicians and composers had to exist within. So Gregorian chant, music theory is very simple. Parallel fifths. Okay? Two notes create a chord, you sing it slowly, it's a very hollow sound, it leaves room for meditation and prayer. Later on, people's actions, their interactions, motion, created a more complex musical system. So, you have liturgical systems in music theory in the Middle Ages or late Middle Ages. So, where the system's more complicated, you have multiple lines that have a series of rules that allow them to move together, and it's all designed to kind of affect us a certain way. You continue on, and you then have modern systems. It's a very small world. Musical theories have gone through 12-tone scales, Russian composers, Middle Eastern music, and it's all sort of integrated together. And many of the rules are chosen to be followed or not. Okay, so as we move through history. So where's the complexity in here? It becomes more complicated. But the complexity isn't the structure of the musical theory. It's the interaction of the music with the people. All right? So Gregorian chant was designed, the theory was designed to instill this feeling of prayer and meditation. The Catholic Church forbid the use of an augmented fourth interval because it was really, really dissonant. It brought in the devil. It was diabolical. We can't have this music in the church. That's not what we want to do. Right? Tipper Gore starts a campaign. Marilyn Manson, let's ban that. Let's put stickers on the labels. Let's not let our kids. So the complexity really becomes the relationship between what the artist-composer wants to do and the society that that music is being played. All right, so there's music. Technology. Same sort of thing. What's the original musical instrument? You have a thought, you push some air, sound wave propagation, you create a note. So technology comes along, creates an interface. The interface, a simple flute. All of a sudden you're starting to use digits. It's no longer a thought and it comes out. It's now a thought and a manipulation of your limbs in some certain way. All right, so 13th, 14th century, all of a sudden there's a harpsichord. You're no longer monophonic, now you're polyphonic. Now you can create multiple musical lines simultaneously because the technology has permitted one person to create a more complex sonic environment than having a group of musicians do it. Okay, let's jump in now. So now we have all this absolutely amazing technology where you can have somebody play an instrument because that's the instrument that they learned on. One of my instruments is a trumpet. So if I play a trumpet, I could stick a mic on the end of my trumpet, capture that sound wave propagation, transduce it into an electrical voltage, change that into a MIDI command, which is the language that we use for multiple instruments to be able to communicate with these command cycles. And have that MIDI command generate tones from either oscillators, like Bob Moog allowed us to do back in the 60s, or recordings and samples. So my trumpet now becomes a string ensemble, or it becomes I can make percussive sounds, I could have a marching orchestra, or a marching army, just based off of how I end up transducing. So where's the complexity? Complexity versus the complicated structures. Well, the complexity becomes, when I just had to sing, I was using mostly my creative side, creative hemisphere of my brain. As the interface continued to become more and more advanced, that started shifting towards the other side of my brain. Because now it had to become very analytical. I had to look at voltages, digital technology, all these sort of, I saw you using PD earlier today in your description. It's an open source, pure data, which is just a series of computer plugins that allow you to modify a sound source in any shape or way that you pre-program. So the complexity for the technological interface now doesn't become the interface or the structure of the system, but it becomes how we use our mind, how we crossfire to still have that creative impulse, but do it in such a technological way that allows us to do all these amazing things. So everything is a learning curve, and there's always a pendulum swing. So we get to that point where the technology becomes a hindrance to our ability to have a creative output. Right? The technology, you have to think about things. 2 or 3 times today I saw a computer stutter. Right? What happens in the creative process when the technology stutters? Well, you lose your mojo. You lose that creative thought. You can't get the beautiful, simple melody out because all of a sudden you're turning around to a computer and you have to switch brains for a minute and get that working. All right, so there's the complexity. But current technology is absolutely, truly amazing. So we have EEG sensors that we can now buy off the shelf, put on our head, and rather than controlling a robotic prosthetic, we could send the signal, this is already being done, to put the output of our synthesizer sounds around the room through a whole different computer speaker array. So all of a sudden, I'm now psychoacoustically influencing the way you feel, right? So the technology becomes there. And by the way, influencing the way you feel. Way back when, Plato, Aristotle, they already knew that music made us feel a certain way. Musical therapy is now a huge, huge field, right? It has been continued to be researched because it makes us feel a certain way. For me, psychoacoustics, I'm starting to understand that the frequencies make us feel a certain way. And the way we feel can sometimes be predicted, right? So we're back to the systems. How do we create a system that predicts a certain emotional outcome? Well, the Gregorian chant did it. If you play minor chords, you're going to predict that the audience is going to feel a little bit sad. If you play a happy, bouncy feel, you can predict that the audience is going to feel more joyous. Okay, so the third point, emergent behavior. So where does emergent behavior for us come into play? Well, that really comes into play with the fact that one musician generating sound, it's a pretty controlled system. You already kind of set up what you want to do. Nobody wants to go into a performance not knowing what's going to come out of this. The moment you put in another human being who has their own creative impulse, call and response. You hear something, you react. You react back. It starts growing. And as the systems became more and more complicated, the variables became more and more complicated, to the point where you could set up systems like in the pure data system that we saw earlier, dealing with healthcare statistics, to modify sound in a certain way, and a musician could play this, and all these filters start happening, and then another musician with their own technology starts playing, and all these other things happen, and it inspires another reaction. Completely unpredictable. So in our world, emergent behavior is actually something we strive for. We want the accident. We want to discover what we can create. Going back to what you said, the difference between invention and innovation. In invention, okay, I'm going to invent a soup with some steak instead of a half of fruit. Innovation, let the emergent behaviors happen between musicians, and let the technology be the conduit for that creative output.